Well, now in the past I've touched upon the Sustainable Development Goals, which is of course Agenda 2030, which is part of a larger agenda, which is Agenda 21, all of course conjured up by the United Nations and their partners, including the WHO. And the reason that I've covered it in the past many times is the fact that Nicola Thinlips, one of the first things that she did when she obtained power, when she came after Alex Salmond, was she signed Scotland up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. Now don't get it twisted. The UK as a whole has signed up to this. But in this specific case, we're talking about Scotland because it all ties in my opinion, very neat and nice with the constant push for BAME representation, something I've also touched upon in the past. But just a wee recap to anybody who may not necessarily be entirely aware of the Sustainable Development Agenda that Nicola Thinlips signed us up to. Here's a brief summary. So an article from The Scotsman in July 2015, the 19th, Nicola Thinlips signs UN pledge on global poverty. Now, it sounds great on paper, but it's more than just global poverty eradication. It goes on to say that Scotland is among the first countries to adopt the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to promote sustainable development across the world. The goals include ending poverty and hunger, ensuring access to education, achieving gender equality, and tackling climate change by 2030, and they will be formally confirmed at the 70th regular session of the UN's General Assembly in New York in September. The plan will encourage governments to engage more with civil society and the private sector to achieve the aims. The goals were first developed at a UN Sustainable Development Conference in Brazil in 2012 and will apply to all countries, unlike the UN's Millennial Development Goals, which were the predecessor, which were only for developing countries. Thinlips said that the UN Sustainable Development Goals offer a vision of the world that I believe people in Scotland share. From ending poverty and hunger, securing education and health services, combating inequality and achieving gender equality, the aims set out by the UN form an agenda for tackling some of the world's greatest problems. That is why I am delighted to confirm that Scotland has become one of the first nations on earth to publicly sign up to these goals and provide international leadership on reducing inequality across the globe. By signing up, we as a government, not Scotland, we as a government, will be required to demonstrate how we will work to achieve these targets by 2030. Fortunately, many of the goals chime with what we in Scotland are already doing to tackle poverty and inequality, not just here at home but globally too. Okay. Sustainable Development Goals, of course. Sustainable Development Goal point 10, to be precise, reducing inequalities and ensuring no one is left behind is integral to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. You dig a wee bit further into this, Goal 10 targets, and you will come across 10.2, which states by 2030, empower and promote the social, economic and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion or economic or other status. But this bit in particular, political inclusion of all. And then we come to this. The SNP back plan to put BAME and disabled candidates at the top of Holyrood list. At the halfway through last year, where they were talking about, because this is 1st of February of this year, halfway through last year, following on from Fentanyl Floyd, what they were talking about continuously was finding ways for them to be able to shoehorn in BAME candidates in order to eradicate systemic racism, etc., etc. And of course, as the months followed on, it came into fruition, and now the regional list candidates, there are several from the SNP's BAME network. So it says here that the SNP back plan to put BAME and disabled candidates on top of Holyrood list, following a vote at the party's conference to look at setting aside seats for underrepresented groups, but it could end up being contested after a QC hired to give an opinion on a new process suggested it was legally dubious. Party chiefs have been desperate to improve BAME representation for some years. At the 2019 general election, every single SNP hopeful was white. Scottish, not fucking white. Anyhow, and despite 22 BAME candidates putting themselves forward for selection in May's Holyrood vote, just 2 were picked. Justice Secretary Hamza Youssef and Quab Stewart in Glasgow Kelvin. Last October, Yusuf told the National he was beyond disappointed at the results. Once again, it is a person of Scots Asian origin, oxymoron, who is representing a seat in Glasgow. In the 20-year history of devolution, the only BAME MSPs that have to be elected have been Scots Asian, oxymoron, and from Glasgow. We should and could have done better. Well, they did go and do better because they simultaneously shoehorned in BAMEs into their regional lists. So we have Graham Campbell, we have Michelle Campbell, we have Rosa Sally, and we have Danish Ashraf. Which leads me on, of course, to the latest escapade from these people. And
BAME Network is proud to announce the SNP's manifesto and what we are doing for Scotland's minority ethnic communities.
I'm proud to say the work of BAME representatives and resolutions put forward by the BAME Network have been incorporated into this manifesto, which shows once again, no matter your background, this party, the SNP, listens to its members and the Scottish people.
Having anti-racist education at the core of our communities is essential for appropriate education of society and for us to truly move the equality agenda forward. We require both votes SNP for this to truly happen. This will allow for support to teachers for professional development and for access to high quality anti-racist resources for every school across Scotland.
You know, I've touched upon this in so many videos in the past, but it's just the way that these people go on. You could arguably throw at me that this is low-hanging fruit, but it's the fact that she says there, anti-racist education. It's imperative. Now, what is anti-racist education? Why do we need anti-racist education in Scottish schools? Why do we need anti-racist academia? Well, we need it because people like Michelle Campbell, people that are in and around the SNP BAME network have demanded and campaigned and all the rest of it for it to be implemented for some time. But what is anti-racist education? Anti-racist education essentially boils down to attacking whiteness. It's about deconstructing who white people are. It's about implying that whiteness is the problem. It's about implying that race is a social construct. And simultaneously, while this is occurring, we need to shoehorn in, just like these people have been shoehorned into positions for them to run their fucking mouth off and potentially stand in our parliament. We need to shoehorn in fake black history into the Scottish history. This is what's happening here. Anti-racist education. These people will not stop. It doesn't matter what you do. And of course, on top of that, there's more to it. It's about shoehorning in black or BAME teachers into the teaching profession. And their claims will be, as I've pointed out in videos, as you probably heard yourself, they will say things to the tune of, BAME students would like to see themselves reflected and represented via having BAME teachers. You know, in the one hand, whites, and I don't know if this is intrinsic in the white man and the white woman, or if this is something that we have been taught. I can't answer this, but there is something seriously fucking wrong in relation to the fact that we as white people, or in our case, Scottish people, seem to be somewhat individualist, whereas these people are not. They're not. Because white kids in school, they don't aspire for greater things because their teacher's white. But the claims being made by these people is that if the teacher is BAME and the pupils are BAME, then, wow, those peoples will those peoples are more likely to strive for better things. But the logic falls flat on its head, because in the next breath we're all told we're all one. So they'll say to you that a BAME teacher in the classroom benefits not just the white kids but the BAME students. But if that logic was correct, then it stands to fucking reason that a white teacher should be able to benefit both whites and BAMEs. It's just bollocks. It's fucking bollocks. It's lies. It is. They want to see themselves, and they are using bollocks in regards to systemic racism, barriers and all the rest of it, anti-racism, etc., to shoehorn in their own. And they proclaim that in doing so, they're accomplishing their so-called dream of achieving justice. Anti-racist education. It's an attack on who we are. It's an attack on our culture, our country, as a people, while simultaneously bootlicking, grovelling, and fucking pandering to people that, I'm sorry, shouldn't be here. Anyway.
And for access to high quality anti-racist resources for every school across Scotland.
We also stipulated improvements in the reporting and publication of data on racist incidents in schools.
Yeah, look at this shit in the background.
A demand from academics to shape future policies that affect our children.
Because of all these reports and all these claims that are 9 times out of 10 baseless and anecdotal, there's this constant bombardment in the media in Scotland of schools, universities, colleges, even primary schools being racist. And they'll claim that BAME pupils have gone and reported racist incidents to their teachers and the authorities within said school, and nothing's been done about it. But we are not defining what a racist incident is. We're not defining what racism is anymore. Because at this point, it's whatever the fuck these people don't like.
The BAME network has asked for continued engagement with communities and with Police Scotland to ensure the full implementation of the hate crime bill passed recently by the Scottish Parliament.
That's fucking unreal. You know, the vast majority of people in Scotland that were aware of this hate crime bill were totally against it. But here we have Graham Anti-White Campbell with a smug fucking gloating grin on his face, talking about it as if this has been done specifically for his ilk. And funnily enough, it has been done for his ilk. It's not been done for my benefit. It's not been done for the Scottish people's benefit. It's been done for the likes of Graham Campbell.
British Inclusion and Diversity Strategy is a commitment from the SNP, confirming what the minority ethnic communities have voiced, that there's institutionalised racism and prejudice in Scotland, and this is the action plan to tackle this problem.
So because the SNP have decided to implement a diversity and inclusion strategy, probably if I had to speculate, it will be rather similar to their race equality framework that they, if I'm right in saying that, it's something along those lines. Race equality framework, yes, it's probably something similar along those lines. But because the SNP have implemented or alluded to in their manifesto that they intend to implement such a strategy if they are re-elected, that somehow confirms, according to Fatima fucking Joji, that is confirming institutionalized racism exists in Scotland. Is this where we're at? This is where we're at. It just does not stop. It does not fucking stop.
And this is the action plan to tackle this problem.
Improving data collection means there will be more evidence to represent intersectionality issues when it comes to making policies.
The SNP will support and resource the Sheku Bayou public inquiry and commit to taking forward findings to deliver improvements and increase public confidence in policing.
Sheku Bayou, of course, the black man that was killed in police custody. And the reason this has been brought up, you ask? George Floyd. Now, of course, Sheku Bayou died in, if I believe, 2014, 2015, around that time. Correct me if I'm mistaken. But the point remains the same. It was an open and shut case at the time. Whether or not you want to bring up the oddities within said story doesn't really matter. The point remains the same. It wasn't until George Floyd died that they decided to open up this case again with the intention of finding out if there was an element of racial prejudice involved. The entire inquiry that has been created on the back of Fentanyl Floyd in relation to Sheku Bayou is solely down to trying to figure out whether or not his death was race related. Why? Because he's brown.
Every last one of our lives has been touched by the pandemic, and many factors combine to determine how drastic that effect has really been. with ethnic minority communities having suffered disproportionately.
Yeah, they always do this. With ethnic minorities having suffered disproportionately throughout COVID. So they look at the stats, they look at the data, and they proclaim, well, this quite clearly indicates institutional racism. They don't take into consideration the lifestyle choices of BAMEs. They don't take into consideration the lack of vitamin D that BAMEs have. They don't take into consideration the fact that BAMEs, on average, tend to ignore the rules in comparison to the complicit whites. Now, none of these things get taken into consideration. Lifestyle choices, etc. None of it gets taken into consideration. But they're allowed to run their fucking mouths off. They're allowed to pass policies, advocate for policies, and do everything that they can to ensure that the lives of the BAMEs are put centre stage and prioritised. Because the implication is that because they are disproportionately affected by a fake fucking virus, that it's racism. There's never any pushback, though there never is.
Throughout COVID, the SNP have taken this into account and set up the expert reference group on COVID-19 and ethnicity to better understand the needs of our diverse communities. And what do they mean by diverse communities? What they fucking mean by this is everyone who's not Scottish. Diverse communities.
The SNP introduced the Racial Equality Framework in 2016. In committing your vote to both votes SNP, this will allow you in overcoming barriers to making Scotland a fairer place to live.
Overcoming barriers, what do they mean by this? Well, of course, they mean the proverbial positive discrimination, for one, unconscious bias training, for two. This is what we're talking about here. A fairer place to live. It's supposed to be a meritocracy in Scotland, but quite clearly, it's not.
We need to see more diverse people in positions of leadership.
We need to see more diverse people in positions of leadership. Why? Why? This is where we're at, Scotland. This is where we're fucking at now. We have a refugee, an ungrateful refugee at that, who fled to our country. And she has done nothing but campaign to ease immigration restrictions, whether that be for migrants and or refugees, quote unquote. And these brown people, they take their identity and they use it as a platform to leverage themselves over and above everybody else, and they're allowed to do so because of our system. The system that has been created, a system that needs to fucking fall. For these people to stand there or sit there and say that things need to be more diverse, what does that mean? Less white. This is Scotland. Scottish people, Scotland's country. It just begs belief. Because I can't, for the life of me, imagine myself going to where she fucking comes from and claiming that it needs to be more diverse. It's too brown over there. But it's allowed here. It's acceptable because it's all under the banner, that rainbow unicorn dusted banner of fucking progression. It's fucking cancer, man.
Which is why the SNP launched the Minority Ethnic Leadership and Development Programme.
Yes, the Ethnic Minority Leadership and Development Programme, where they have put money aside, working in tandem with big businesses, etc., where they are specifically prioritising BAMEs to put them into leadership roles via training. Why? Positive discrimination. Why? Breaking down barriers. Why? To destroy systematic and institutional racism. Reality of the matter is, they are shoehorning their own into positions of power by exploiting the system of progression, quote unquote, in order to combat racism. Doesn't exist. The only racism that I see is prioritising people like this fucking boot over their own.
Scotland needs full control over its employment law and its immigration policy so that we can abolish once and for all the awful policy of no recourse to public funds.
Oh, you mean when people that have no right to be here, you know, they've had their claim rejected and they end up desolate. This is what they're talking about here. This is what they're talking about. So anybody that comes to this country and pretends to be fleeing war, persecution, etc., etc., they should be guaranteed somewhere to stay while they're here. You shouldn't be here in the first place. if you ask me.
A policy which targets and makes destitute the most vulnerable people in our society, those who fled persecution.
Those who fled persecution, torture, or ill treatment from abroad. But you assume, this is the assumption, it's not just from Graham Campbell. Look at this bullshit, by the way. SNP, Black Lives Matter. The assumption is when some wanker rolls up on a dinghy, when some jet black African pulls up, however he gets here, via the airport or via a dinghy, the automatic assumption from all of these people, whether that's the establishment, whether that be the MSN, or from Graham Anti-White Campbell, the automatic assumption is that they are fleeing persecution, torture, or ill treatment from abroad. It's a bandwagon, it's a gravy train. It really fucking is. And I'm sorry, they're not our problem. They're not our problem.
Torture or ill treatment from abroad. We want to make sure that no recourse to public funds is consigned to the dustbin of history where it belongs.
We are a nation that believes there's no place for racism.
We are a nation. Who is we? She wasn't even fucking born here. She wasn't born here. It begs belief to me that this is where we're at now. And it all ties into this sustainable development shit that I was talking about at the start. Global citizenship, where there's no borders and there is no one specific group of people. We're all one. This woman wasn't born here. Oh, wow. Fucking wow.
In our beautiful Scotland. Both votes SNP will strengthen our aim to include the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination into Scottish law.
How amazing would it be to see more people of colour in public artwork?
But we're all one. We're all one. But yet, they're not happy that things are too white when it comes to art, public art in Scotland. Ethnically Scottish art. They're not happy with that. How amazing would it be? It begs belief to me. It really begs belief to me that they can sit there and complain and moan and whine and cry and greet about the fact that things are too white. But if I fucking make even the slightest hint that things are getting too BAME, it's a fucking problem. Pardon my French, I apologise, but these people irritate me. They really irritate me.
That makes you feel that you really belong here.
Oh, but we're all one.
To see a bit of yourself in the Scottish landscape.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't be here.
The SNP celebrates the communities that have contributed to Scotland.
And when did the contributions to Scotland start from your people, exactly? Because Scotland was a white nation. Scotland's been a country for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before anybody ever stepped foot in it that wore a hijab.
And it's both vote SNP to support this illustrative representation.
For a parliament that reflects the diverse population of Scotland, it has to be both votes SNP. You know, I mean, I could go on. I really could go on. I could rant and rave about this all night, but it's just... it's ridiculous. I can't say for certain how many of these individuals that have been shoehorned into the top of the regional seats will in fact get in. But the fact remains the same, that these people are working in tandem with the SNP themselves to implement policies. Another example, of course, was Glasgow City Council. They decided to mark Stephen Lawrence Day and invite the family of Stephen Lawrence to Glasgow for the occasion on his anniversary of his death. Where did this motion come from? Well, of course, if I scroll down, who appears? Graham fucking Campbell. Where's the motion for Chris Donald? There isn't one. No, there's not. You know, we have anti-racist education. We have them being shoehorned into positions on regional seats. We have them demanding action in the workplace. I mean, where does it stop? Where does it fucking stop? You know, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. I mean, even this one, I'll leave in this. You know, Rosa Sally. Thanks, Thinlips, for introducing me to your constituents in your leaflet. The polls show the SNP will be in government to secure IndyRef, not going to happen, and progressive, quote-unquote, SNP majorities with both votes SNP. You know, and if we look at this, That's probably a bit bigger. This is what was going through the doors of Gavin Hill in the last few days. And it goes on to say that Rosa is the SNP's #1 candidate in the Glasgow regional list, above Finlips, by the way. I wonder why that is. Oh, because she's brown. We know that to be the case. We know that. She's a human rights activist who came to Scotland with her family aged 12 as a refugee from Iraqi Kurdistan. She was one of the celebrated Glasgow girls who campaigned against dawn raids and the detention of child asylum seekers. Rosa said it is a great honour to have been selected as the SNP's lead candidate in the regional list. Glasgow's my home and is a very diverse city, so I want to represent that. Building a fair and equal country is my dream, and I think with independence we can achieve it. You know. Following on from that, in this article about Rosa Sally, it says down here, if I could find it, that she joined the pro-Scottish independence SNP in 2014, not long after the people of Scotland voted relatively narrowly to remain in the... This is biased as fuck because it was 45-55, but you know. And I voted for the independence in 2014, but you know, that's bullshit. It wasn't narrow, it was a 10-point lead, if you believe the polls. To remain in the UK in a referendum in September of that year. A human rights campaigner and graduate of Glasgow's University of Strathclyde, Sally, so she's a rather privileged little boot, but yet she still complains. Sally has long been critical of the UK's immigration system, a matter reserved for the Parliament in London. Refugees are coming to Britain for safety. Again, the assumption is that is always the case. It's not. It needs to be proven. And the way the system is treating them is really inhumane, highlighting the cruelty of detention, lock changes and evictions. Lock changes for the people, of course, that were outstaying their welcome. They had already been told that they had no... Oh, what was the story? If I remember correctly. Essentially, sorry, they were told they had to leave, but they refused to leave, so they had the locks changed. That was what happened there. But again, in evictions. So that was the push for me for independence, that we could create the kind of system that has dignity and human rights at the centre of everything we do. So essentially, she comes to our country as a refugee, she obtains safety, quote unquote, and all the rest of all that good shit. And what's one of the first things she does is she starts to get old and gets political, starts campaigning to get more of her own ilk in. They're all doing the fucking same. Peace.